3 minutes. That's all it took. A sealed envelope, a private corridor at Clarence House, and a call no royal ever wants to receive. When senior physicians requested an emergency audience with Queen Camilla, even palace aides felt the temperature drop. What they delivered behind those closed doors wasn't routine, it was urgent. And by the time Camilla emerged, something had changed, dramatically. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The atmosphere inside Clarence House that afternoon carried a tension that no one could quite name, yet everyone could feel. Conversations were shorter, footsteps were quieter. Staff who had worked in royal residences for decades sensed an unusual shift in rhythm, as though the building itself understood that something irreversible was approaching. Normally, medical visits were discreet and almost invisible, handled with efficiency and minimal disruption. But this was different. This time, it wasn't a single trusted physician slipping in through a side entrance. It was a coordinated arrival, multiple senior specialists, faces known in the highest medical circles, ushered through restricted access points with an urgency that bypassed routine courtesy. Security tightened without announcement. Corridors were cleared. Private secretaries were asked to step aside. Even longtime aides exchanged guarded glances, careful not to speculate aloud, yet unable to suppress the dread forming in their thoughts. The Queen Consort had maintained a demanding schedule in recent weeks, appearing composed, steady, unwavering. But behind that composure, there had been whispers, subtle fatigue, a slight shortening of engagements, the quiet rescheduling of appearances that few outside palace walls had noticed. Those small adjustments now felt less like coincidence and more like warning signs. When Camilla was informed that the doctors required immediate audience, she did not hesitate. That, perhaps, was the first sign that she already understood the gravity. She rose without visible panic, but those closest to her would later recall the almost imperceptible pause before she spoke, a fractional delay that revealed the weight settling onto her shoulders. Inside the private room, formalities were brief. The lead physician did not waste words. His tone remained measured, respectful, yet undeniably grave. This was not reassurance. This was recalibration. As the update unfolded, Camilla listened in silence. Her posture, usually relaxed in private settings, became rigid. Her hands, often expressive during conversation, tightened subtly against the arm of her chair. A controlled breath, a nod. No outward display of fear, but a shift nonetheless, the kind that does not escape trained observers. The implications stretched beyond personal health. The monarchy, built upon stability and continuity, does not respond lightly to uncertainty at its core. And what the doctors presented introduced precisely that, uncertainty. It wasn't simply a matter of treatment or temporary adjustment. The language used carried undertones of unpredictability, of variables that could not be fully contained. In a family where every public movement is interpreted as a signal, even the smallest change can ignite speculation. Camilla understood this instinctively. The update did not just concern her well-being. It threatened to ripple outward into constitutional considerations, public perception, and the delicate balance within the royal household itself. When the meeting concluded, the doctors departed as discreetly as they had arrived, but the air they left behind felt heavier. Camilla remained composed as she stepped back into the corridor, yet something in her expression had hardened, not weakness, but awareness. Awareness that the coming days would demand strength beyond ceremony, strength beyond tradition. But what exactly did those doctors see in the results that compelled them to break centuries of royal protocol? Long before the urgent meeting, there were whispers, cancelled engagements, shortened appearances, subtle schedule shifts buried in palace press releases. To the public, it seemed ordinary, but behind the scenes, a timeline was quietly forming. And when pieced together, it reveals something far more unsettling than anyone outside those gilded gates realized. In the weeks leading up to that sealed envelope moment at Clarence House, the changes were almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. A charity appearance quietly removed from the calendar, a regional visit trimmed from 2 days to 1, a reception delegated at the last minute to a senior aide. None of it dramatic enough to trigger alarm, yet collectively, it formed a pattern that seasoned royal observers could not ignore. Inside palace offices, explanations were offered with calm precision, minor adjustments, routine scheduling refinements, private commitments. The language was polished, the message reassuring. But the rhythm of Camilla's public life had subtly shifted. There were also the private consultations. Increased visits logged discreetly, names entered into secure diaries without fanfare, not the usual annual checkups or predictable seasonal assessments, but a sequence of appointments that hinted at monitoring rather than maintenance. Specialists consulted, follow-ups arranged with unusual speed. The kind of vigilance that suggests doctors are watching something evolve in real time. Palace insiders, bound by loyalty and silence, began using careful words in hushed conversation. Fatigue, they would say, just fatigue. Yet fatigue, when repeated too often, becomes a code. Camilla herself refused to concede even that. In public, she remained composed, measured, steady. Her voice did not waver, her smile did not falter. She leaned into her duties with deliberate determination, aware that perception is power within the monarchy. To admit strain is to invite scrutiny, and scrutiny, in an institution already navigating modern pressures, can spiral quickly. So she pressed on, determined that no flicker of vulnerability would escape into the headlines. That resilience, admirable as it was, only deepened the quiet concern among those closest to her. The monarchy has always guarded matters of health with near-sacred secrecy. History is filled with delayed disclosures and carefully timed statements designed to protect continuity above all else. Stability is the crown's unspoken currency. Any hint of fragility at its center must be managed, shaped, contained. Advisors understood this instinctively. They monitored press chatter, they tracked social media speculation, they prepared contingency language long before any formal announcement was necessary. Because if the pattern became visible to the public, the narrative would no longer be theirs to control. Within private meetings, the tone shifted from cautious optimism to guarded realism. Medical briefings grew longer. Discussions extended beyond immediate treatment to broader implications. What if rest became essential rather than optional? What if appearances needed significant reduction? Each question, though hypothetical, carried constitutional weight. Camilla's role was not ceremonial alone. It was symbolic, stabilizing, deeply intertwined with the king's public presence. Any prolonged absence would reverberate far beyond palace walls, and still Camilla insisted on composure. She reviewed brief, ingene papers. She attended select engagements. She projected strength. Yet behind that projection, a quiet monitoring process intensified. Tests were repeated, data compared, patterns analyzed with increasing urgency. The timeline that had begun as scattered adjustments was converging toward a single decisive moment. By the time the doctors requested that emergency audience, the urgent update was not sudden at all. It was the culmination of weeks of concealed vigilance, of mounting indicators that could no longer be softened by careful phrasing. The palace had hoped for reassurance, for stabilization, for a conclusion that would allow normalcy to resume. And when the final test results came in, they didn't confirm fears, they amplified them. The room fell silent as the lead physician began to speak. What they revealed was not catastrophic, but it was unpredictable, and unpredictability, in a monarchy built on stability, can be far more dangerous. Camilla listened without interrupting, but those closest to her say it was the uncertainty, not the severity, that left her visibly shaken. The update centered on a condition that demanded immediate lifestyle recalibration, not an abrupt collapse, not a dramatic emergency requiring sirens or headlines. Instead, something more insidious, a development that would require careful management, disciplined adjustment, and constant evaluation. It was the kind of medical reality that does not explode into public view overnight, but lingers, evolves, and tests endurance over time. The doctors spoke in measured language, outlining necessary changes, reduced strain, controlled scheduling, strategic rest, words that sound simple on paper, words that in practice carry enormous consequence for someone whose life is governed by duty. The most unsettling element was not what they knew, but what they could not guarantee. Progression was nasatone. Stability was possible but not promised. Monitoring would be essential. Adjustments would need to be ongoing. In the monarchy, predictability is armor. The crown survives because it projects permanence. Yet here, permanence felt suddenly fragile. Camilla understood that immediately. A role built on unwavering presence could not easily accommodate unpredictability. As the implications unfolded, the strain on royal duties became impossible to ignore. State visits, ceremonial obligations, charity patronages, each commitment carefully planned months in advance, now stood beneath a question mark. Could she maintain the pace expected of a queen consort? Could she continue to shoulder engagements that required travel, long hours, relentless public interaction? Scaling back even temporarily would invite scrutiny, and scrutiny, in the modern age, multiplies faster than reassurance. Internally, Camilla's resilience collided with private vulnerability. She had endured decades of public criticism before earning acceptance within the institution. She had fought for legitimacy, for stability, for quiet respect. To confront a condition that might limit her capacity felt like a cruel reversal. Strength had always been her shield. Now strength would require something different: restraint. The realization did not break her composure, but it pressed heavily against it. Those present noticed the subtle shift. Her breathing slowed deliberately. Her questions were precise, practical. She asked about timelines, about safeguards, about options. There was no outward display of fear. Yet in the tightening of her voice, in the stillness that replaced her usual warmth, there was acknowledgement. This was not temporary inconvenience. It was a recalibration of her future. Beyond personal impact, the broader implications hovered unspoken, yet undeniable. If her public presence ebb, even slightly, the balance within the royal household would adjust. Increased visibility for other senior royals would follow. Responsibilities might shift, optics would change. In an institution where symbolism matters as much as governance, such shifts ripple outward into discussions about succession dynamics, perception of stability, and generational transition. Advisors understood this immediately. Quietly, almost instinctively, contingency conversations began to form in parallel, not as rebellion against her role, but as preparation for uncertainty. The monarchy does not wait for crises to deepen before preparing for them. Plans were sketched in guarded meetings, schedules reviewed, language drafted but not yet used. And as Camilla absorbed the full weight of what lay ahead, she realized that the urgent update was not a singular moment, it was the beginning of a prolonged test. Yet the medical update wasn't the only reason Camilla's world began to tilt. The British monarchy does not pause, it adapts or fractures. As news of the urgent update quietly circulated within senior circles, questions began forming that no one dared ask aloud. If Camilla stepped back, even temporarily, who absorbs the weight? And what would that signal to a nation already scrutinizing every royal move? Within hours of the medical briefing, the issue had moved beyond private concern and into strategic calculation. The modern monarchy exists in a delicate balance, suspended between tradition and relentless public evaluation. Approval ratings rise and fall with subtle shifts in perception. Generational divides shape expectations. Younger audiences demand transparency. Older loyalists expect stoicism. Against that backdrop, even the slightest alteration in Camilla's presence risked being interpreted as instability, and instability in constitutional symbolism can become a lightning rod. Senior advisors understood the stakes immediately. Conversations that once revolved around ceremonial calendars now pivoted toward redistribution. Which engagements could be reassigned without raising suspicion? Which public appearances were essential to preserve continuity? The task was surgical. Too much reshuffling would spark rumor. Too little adjustment would strain Camilla beyond medical guidance. The margin for error felt razor thin. In parallel, Prince William's evolving role took on sharper definition. Already positioned as the face of generational transition, his schedule had been steadily expanding. Now the expansion risked acceleration. Increased visibility could project strength, but it could also amplify whispered narratives about transition happening faster than anticipated. Every additional speech, every added state function, would be dissected for hidden meaning. Was it support? Was it preparation? Or was it something more decisive? The palace could not afford ambiguity. Yet ambiguity hovered over every decision. Media monitoring teams shifted into high alert. Analysts tracked trending topics hour by hour. Commentators speculated about subtle changes in tone during public engagements. The digital landscape has no patience for silence, and yet silence remained the monarchy's instinctive shield. Advisors debated whether to preempt speculation with controlled transparency or maintain dignified restraint. Each option carried risk. Too much disclosure could fuel alarm. Too little could invite suspicion. In this era, perception often outruns reality. Public approval dynamics added another layer of complexity. Camilla's journey to acceptance had been hard-won, shaped by years of skepticism, transformed into measured respect. A sudden reduction in visibility could reopen dormant criticisms. Critics might frame absence as fragility. Supporters might interpret it as sacrifice. The narrative would not wait politely for official clarification. It would evolve in real time, shaped by commentators with no allegiance to palace discretion. Amid these strategic calculations, Camilla remained resolute. She refused to entertain language that implied retreat. Her determination was not reckless denial. It was defiance rooted in experience. She had endured storms far more personal and public than this. To appear weakened now, after finally standing firmly within her role, felt unacceptable. Yet determination alone could not override medical reality. The tension between responsibility and limitation tightened with each passing hour. The monarchy's fragile equilibrium rested on invisible negotiations between health and duty, perception and privacy, resilience and realism. Advisors spoke in careful tones, aware that any misstep could ripple beyond the immediate crisis. Plans were drafted quietly, never labeled as contingency, but understood as such, because while institutions can project strength, they are sustained by human endurance. And human endurance has limits. As strategic discussions intensified and headlines edged closer to speculation, it became clear that the urgent update was not merely a personal trial or even a political recalibration. It was a stress test for an institution navigating modern expectations under historic weight. Yet beneath the constitutional calculations and media strategies, something far more intimate was unfolding, something that would shake the very core of Camilla's world. But the greatest shock wasn't institutional. It was deeply personal. Those who saw King Charles that evening describe a man unusually quiet. Not panicked, not dramatic, just reflective. For decades, Camilla has been his constant through scandal, redemption, and ascension. Now, faced with uncertainty about her well-being, the monarch found himself confronting a fear he rarely allows to surface: the possibility of loss not of power, but of partnership. Their journey had never been simple. It had been marked by scrutiny, by public resistance, by years spent navigating the shadow of history before finally stepping into legitimacy. Through every headline and every whispered doubt, Camilla had stood beside him, steady and unyielding. She was not merely a consort in title. She was the emotional anchor that steadied a future king long before the crown ever rested on his head. And now, as the medical update echoed in his thoughts, Charles was forced to imagine a version of his reign altered by her fragility. That possibility cut deeper than any political challenge. He requested a private consultation with the doctors soon after their briefing with Camilla concluded. It was not a ceremonial inquiry, it was personal. He asked direct questions, pressing gently but firmly for clarity on timelines, on risks, on safeguards. The physicians answered with professionalism, careful not to overpromise. Charles listened intently, absorbing not only the facts, but the spaces between them, the hesitations that hinted at variables still beyond control. The monarch who had waited decades for his moment now faced the stark reminder that time, even for kings, cannot be commanded. In a subtle but telling move, a minor engagement scheduled for the following week was quietly cancelled. The explanation offered was routine. Yet those who understood palace rhythms recognized the deviation. Charles rarely withdrew without necessity. His public composure remained intact, but beneath it lay a gravity that did not go unnoticed. Conversations became shorter, his focus sharpened. Protective instincts, long embedded beneath royal restraint, surfaced with renewed intensity. Behind closed doors, discussions expanded beyond immediate, ate care to longer-term adjustments. What if Camilla needed sustained reduction in appearances? How would they maintain unity in public while honoring medical advice? Charles resisted framing the situation's retreat. Instead, he spoke of recalibration, of protecting strength rather than conceding it. Still, the emotional weight pressed quietly against him. The crown demands endurance. Marriage demands devotion. In this moment, those two responsibilities collided. When they next appeared together in public, observers sensed something subtle yet unmistakable. Charles's tone carried a gentler cadence. His gestures lingered fractionally longer. There was no overt display of concern, yet an undercurrent of protectiveness flowed through the engagement. Camilla, ever composed, matched his steadiness. But the dynamic had shifted. It was not weakness on display. It was solidarity, deliberate, almost defiant. Their shared history, forged through adversity, now became their shield. They had weathered storms that threatened reputations and reshaped public opinion. This challenge, though quieter, felt no less profound. For Charles, the urgent update was not an abstract briefing. It was a reminder of the human vulnerability that exists beneath regalia. The thought of navigating the weight of kingship without her steady counsel lingered in the background of every decision. And as their inner circle closed ranks, speculation outside the palace walls began to swell. It started with a single cancelled appearance, then another. Royal watchers noticed. Commentators speculated. Within hours, social media erupted with theories, some compassionate, others ruthless. The palace refused immediate comment, and that silence became fuel. Suddenly, the urgent update was no longer contained within Clarence House. It was becoming a global conversation. The speed was breathtaking. In the digital age, absence speaks louder than presence, and Camilla's carefully reduced schedule became a flashing signal. Checks trended before sunrise. Analysts dissected archived footage, comparing tone, posture, phrasing. Amateur commentators declared insider knowledge. Established broadcasters invited medical experts to speculate in abstract terms, carefully avoiding confirmation while implying gravity. The vacuum of official detail created a marketplace of interpretation, and that marketplace was relentless. Inside palace communications offices, tension escalated. Timing became everything. Release a statement too soon, and risk inflaming fear with incomplete facts. Wait too long, and allow rumor to solidify into perceived truth. Advisors debated strategy deep into the evening. The monarchy has historically guarded health matters with disciplined restraint. Delayed disclosures have long been part of royal protocol, designed to protect stability above all else. But this was not another century. This was an era where silence is rarely interpreted as dignity. More often, it is framed as concealment. Public reaction fractured along emotional lines. Many expressed sympathy, recalling Camilla's long road to acceptance and acknowledging the human vulnerability beneath royal titles. Others were less generous, suggesting instability, hinting at deeper crises, questioning transparency. Compassion and criticism collided in equal measure. The monarchy, already navigating generational scrutiny, found itself under a microscope, once again not for scandal, but for uncertainty. International press outlets amplified the narrative. Headlines ranged from measured concern to dramatic conjecture. Phrases like constitutional implications and future of the crown began circulating widely. The story leapt across borders, reshaped by each publication's tone. In some corners, it became a tale of resilience. In others, it morphed into a forecast of institutional fragility. The urgent update, once confined to a private briefing room, had evolved into a global debate about continuity and strength. Within Clarence House, the pressure to respond intensified. Camilla followed the coverage closely, absorbing not just the content, but the undercurrents. She understood the risk of prolonged ambiguity. She also understood the power of controlled candor. Unlike eras past, where royal mystique thrived on distance, the modern monarchy survives through calibrated openness. To appear evasive now could undo years of carefully rebuilt trust. Sources close to the inner circle suggested that Camilla leaned toward transparency, though not in dramatic fashion. She resisted sensational framing. Instead, she advocated for clarity without spectacle. A statement began taking shape, precise, measured, acknowledging necessary adjustments while emphasizing continuity. Every word was weighed, every phrase scrutinized for unintended interpretation. The balance had to be exact, honest but steady, human yet unshaken. As draft circulated among senior advisors and legal counsel, one truth became clear: this moment would redefine perception, not because of the condition itself, but because of how it was handled. The monarchy stood at a crossroads between old instinct and modern expectation. Camilla's voice, steady despite private uncertainty, guided the tone. But what Camilla decided next stunned even her closest advisors. Shaken, yes, but defeated, never. After hours of private deliberation, Camilla made a decision that reframed the entire crisis. Instead of retreating entirely, she would redefine her role publicly, not as a symbol of fragility, but as a testament to endurance. And in doing so, she transformed a moment of vulnerability into one of quiet strength. The expectation from some co-Branas had been predictable: withdraw, rest, disappear from view until certainty returned. It would have been the safer route, historically familiar. But Camilla understood something deeper about the fragile psychology of monarchy in a modern age. Absence creates narratives. Silence invites reinvention by outsiders. A total retreat would not calm speculation, it would inflame it. So instead of vanishing, she chose calibration, selective appearances, carefully spaced engagements. Presence with precision. Medical guidance became her framework, not her limitation. Schedules were redesigned around recovery windows. Travel reduced, but not eliminated. High-impact engagements prioritized over ceremonial routine. It was not defiance of advice. It was partnership with it. She would not overextend, but neither would she surrender visibility. That balance required discipline. It required humility. It required strength of a different kind, the strength to say no to some obligations in order to preserve the ones that mattered most. Then came the address, not dramatic, not overly detailed, but deliberate. Her message emphasized steadiness, continuity, and gratitude for public concern. She acknowledged the need for adjustments without surrendering authority. The tone was calm, measured, unwavering. There was no trace of self-pity. Instead, she reframed the narrative around responsibility to herself, to her family, and to the institution she now represented. In doing so, she subtly shifted the conversation from crisis to resilience. When she appeared publicly for the first time after the urgent update, observers searched for weakness. They found composure. Her movements were deliberate but assured, her voice steady. There was a quiet resolve beneath her words that resonated more powerfully than dramatic declarations ever could. Charles stood beside her, not overshadowing, not compensating but reinforcing. Their partnership, long tested by history, now became the central image of continuity. Public reaction began to change. Where speculation once dominated, admiration slowly took root. Commentators noted her refusal to retreat. Supporters praised her transparency. Even critics found it difficult to frame her recalibration as fragility. The monarchy, so often accused of being distant, suddenly appeared human, navigating uncertainty, not through denial, but through adaptation. In that subtle shift, something important happened. Vulnerability did not weaken the crown. It humanized it. Within palace walls, advisors recognized the strategic brilliance of the decision. By maintaining selective presence, Camilla avoided triggering constitutional anxiety while honoring medical reality. Responsibilities were redistributed with less suspicion. William's expanding role felt supportive rather than anticipatory. The narrative stabilized, not perfectly, not completely, but sufficiently to quiet the sharpest edges of speculation. And yet, beneath the composed appearances and carefully worded statements, a quieter tension remained. Resilience does not erase unpredictability. Strength does not guarantee certainty. Camilla had redefined the crisis, yes, but the medical variables still existed. Monitoring would continue. Adjustments might evolve. The path ahead was steadier, but not fully clear. Yet even resilience cannot silence one haunting question. Moments like these don't just test individuals, they test institutions. The urgent update delivered at Clarence House may fade from headlines, but its ripple effects could shape the monarchy's trajectory for years. In a world demanding transparency and authenticity, Camilla's response may redefine royal strength not as invincibility, but as grace under pressure. The modern monarchy stands at a crossroads unlike any it has faced before. For centuries, distance preserved mystique. Silence protected authority. Health matters were guarded with impenetrable discretion, revealed only when absolutely unavoidable. But today, that formula no longer guarantees trust. The public expects candor. They demand signs of humanity. They measure relevance not just by ceremony, but by sincerity. In that shifting landscape, Camilla's decision to recalibrate openly, rather than retreat entirely, may prove more consequential than any single medical update. Her composure under uncertainty sent a subtle but unmistakable signal. The crown is not immune to vulnerability, yet it is not undone by it either. That balance, fragile, deliberate, carries symbolic weight. When she stepped forward instead of disappearing, she reshaped the narrative from speculation to steadiness. The monarchy did not fracture. It adjusted, quietly, strategically. That adaptation may become the defining hallmark of this era. At the same time, the ripple effects extend beyond Camilla herself. The next generation has already begun to shoulder greater visibility, not as a dramatic transition, but as a measured evolution. Prince William's expanding presence now feels less like distant preparation and more like integrated support. The line of succession remains intact, yet the distribution of public responsibility grows more fluid. This is not abdication, it is alignment, a monarchy learning to share weight rather than concentrate it. Public perception has shifted in subtle ways. Where once the institution was criticized for emotional distance, there is now acknowledgement of shared human experience, illness, uncertainty, endurance. These are universal themes. By confronting them without spectacle, Camilla humanized a structure often viewed as untouchable. Sympathy did not weaken authority, it deepened connection. In a media climate driven by extremes, restraint became its own form of strength. The partnership between Charles and Camilla has also emerged strengthened rather than strained. Their shared appearances, marked by quiet solidarity, reinforced an image of continuity rooted in mutual support. After decades of complex history, their bond now represents stability at the core of the institution. The urgent update, rather than isolating them, underscored their interdependence. In moments of uncertainty, that unity speaks louder than any formal declaration, yet adaptation does not mean complacency. Monitoring continues, adjustments remain possible. The monarchy moves forward with careful awareness that unpredictability still exists beneath the surface. But what has changed is the tone. The narrative is no longer defined by whispered fear, but by deliberate endurance. The doctor's words may have shaken her, but they did not break her, and perhaps that is the larger lesson unfolding within these palace walls. Strength is not the absence of challenge, it is the refusal to surrender to it. The crown endures not because it avoids storms, but because it evolves within them. As expectations shift and scrutiny intensifies, resilience must look different than it once did, less rigid, more responsive, still rooted in tradition, yet unafraid of recalibration. Because in the House of Windsor, history is not written in moments of comfort, but in how the crown endures when everything feels uncertain. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.